Right, is the volume okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Oh, but now you're on mute.
Oh, good point, yeah. Okay. So if I disappear from the meeting, it just means the power's gone off or something. So don't. I'll just try and get back. We do have backup power at the office here, but it takes a little while to kick in sometimes. But hopefully we're not going to have any problems like that. I'm just going to put my slides on the screen. So you should see a PowerPoint slide. Can you see the PowerPoint slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I can't. So if things go wrong while I'm presenting, please just interrupt me if I'm talking and I can't see what's going on your side. It's just for some reason or other I can't see the slides on my screen when I'm displaying them to you. I'm not sure why. Okay, so today we're going to be having one contact session, the first contact session for the course. There's going to be 6 contact sessions in all, and I'll explain a little bit more about them in a second. Just some online housekeeping, just to reduce costs and prevent background interruptions. Please keep your video off and your microphone off if you're not talking. It's very nice to see faces, but you're not required to switch your video on for the course. Remember to unmute when you speak and then revert back to muting when you're not speaking. So try and avoid those sort of legacy microphones which stay on and then there's background noise and so on. If you want to ask a question, put your hand up. But as I say, I'm not able to monitor the slides and the Teams at the same time. So if you have a question and I can't see your hand, I'll check every now and then, but just interrupt me, and that's perfectly fine. Okay. If you're asking a question and you're taking too long, I might ask you to shorten your question if you're talking for too long, but I'm sure that's not going to happen. And then if you have a problem accessing Teams or your system during the session, it will be recorded. So we'll try and sort you out as the session is going on. But we don't have a lot of control over the Teams and maybe the access on your side of the system. So if you can't get back into the meeting, there will be a recording of the session. And you're welcome to ask questions at any stage during the contact session. So if you have a question now, you can put your hand up and ask it. I don't mind being interrupted. Okay. So, but I just can't always see the hands up in the session. That's the only problem. Okay. So the course is divided into 3 broad sections. The first session, or the first 2 sessions, cover the early phase of quantitative research design. And then the second and third units cover the middle and the later stages of quantitative research design. So it's kind of structured according to activities that might be happening at the beginning, middle, and towards the end of the research process. For this session this evening, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves in a second because I need to get to know a little bit about you. I'm then going to briefly go over what we're going to cover in the module. I'm going to talk a little bit about assignment 1, then we can maybe take a short break depending on how far we get. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the session talking about the philosophy of research and how that relates to quantitative research. And then also, because this is about supervision, if we get time, we're going to do a fun exercise thinking about personalities and what the implication that might have for supervisors and students. And then there should be time for questions at the end. But as I say, you're welcome to interrupt me as we're going through the session. Okay, so just to begin with, I'd like you each to introduce yourself. So just to say, what is your name? What discipline do you work in? What's your area of research? Doesn't have to be a long explanation, just a brief explanation. What experience do you have doing quantitative research? And when you think about your past supervisor, or if you have a current supervisor, what is one positive lesson that you've learned from them? Okay, so if we can start, let's start with TB. I've got Teboho. Can you start? Just going to go down the names on the list here. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Doc. My name
Yeah.
is Teboho Bukaba. I'm a lecturer at UJ in the Department of Applied Information Systems under College of Business and Economics. My research area is on the application of AI for good, for applying AI in healthcare and transportation. So those are the two areas that I alternate with, and I also take supervised students who are interested to do research in those specific areas. And in the type of research we do, because we're collecting a lot of secondary data, and then we apply the different artificial intelligence techniques to the data so that we can maybe generate models that can be used maybe in healthcare emergency care unit to fasten the admission process and so forth. So most of the studies that I do with students or I do by myself, they are more quantitative because we do a lot of experiments. So it's more on quantitative research. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, thank you. And your supervisor, if you had a supervisor, what's one positive lesson that you learned from them when you were a student?
I had a lot of supervisors, but my last supervisor for my PhD, because I had to change supervisors, I think twice during my PhD. The last supervisor I worked with really ensured that I get grounded in the quantitative research and know exactly, because in my space or my field or the space that I'm in information system where I work in, we basically when we teach the student, in terms of the methodology framework, we always introduce and try for them to apply the Sanders research onion framework. So we always try to make sure we link even the philosophies and the research approaches to the type of research design that we are working on. So I learned a lot from my supervisor, the last supervisor. And I think I'm carrying on with what I've learned, and then also what I'm learning from the course as well, I'm bringing in as well. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Phil. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Corin? Sorry, Theodora, yes, yeah. Sorry, Theodora, your hand's up. Okay, Corin, sorry, can you go ahead? I'm not sure. I think Theodora might be having
Sure.
connectivity problems. Yeah.
No problem. My name is Karen Johnson. I am not in academia. I work in business. I work for Discovery Vitality at the moment. So my discipline really is business. I do some research supervision for fun, and that would be for MBA students at UJ, is where I've done research supervision. My research, we do some research at work, and that is really around lifestyle behaviors and how these are able to impact various aspects of health, such as the impact of physical activity on diabetes or cancer, whatever the case is, mental well-being. I have very little in pretty much no experience in quantitative research, and I actually find it quite daunting. And to be honest, the fact that I'm here, I find quite daunting. When we started last year, there was a qualitative module, and this year there isn't. So I am really expecting to learn an enormous amount. And as far as my supervisors are concerned, my PhD supervisor was really amazing, and he was there every step of the way. He reached out to me all the time to find out where I disappeared, to like really walked the journey with me more than I would have thought possible. So I honestly credit my PhD to him, and very positive, and something that I try and give a fraction of to my students.
Good, thank you very much. Theodora, can you communicate with us now? I'm not going to. Kenny, can you answer the questions? Is your communication working?
Hi everyone. Hi, Dr. Devi.
Yes,
it's good to meet with you again this time around. So my name is Kenny Chiwarawara, and I am in development studies. I have a bit of experience in quantitative studies, having done it in my honors and masters. And I made use of Stata at some point, but I really need to get back to it now. I haven't been using it for some time, so that's kind of my story. What experience do I have in doing quantitative research? Yeah, at some point, I also do some migration studies. So at some point, I was actually involved in a project that involved a lot of quantitative stuff, although at some point I focused more on the quali, but I was also instrumental in the quanti as well. But I really want to get back into the quantitative side of things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so your experience with supervisors, is there one lesson that you learned from any of your supervisors?
Oh yeah, no, there is. I found that a supervisor who, so for example, when I was doing my master's, I worked very closely with a supervisor who, on a project, who was more quantitative inclined. When I did my PhD, the supervisor was more qualitative kind of inclined, and so it kind of moved me towards that direction. So looking back, I think that I perhaps should have had two supervisors, because I think the supervisor wanted to draw me to things that he was more familiar with. But I learned quite a lot as well from the supervisor. But it was not really quantitative stuff, because it was not really his area. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be. I mean, it's just, I think there's some sort of general lessons that we learn from supervisors, irrespective of what the methodology is. So it's
Okay. Yeah. So maybe one thing that really stood out for me, which I'm using now as a supervisor, is that my supervisor would communicate with me that, of course, there were times that I think he got busy, but the kind of communication he did with me was quite helpful, in that he would tell me that in this month I'll be busy with marking, so I won't be able to look at your work. Maybe use that time to work on your chapter, and then I'll have time around this time, so let's work around that. So he would communicate, and I would communicate as well. So I think that helped our relationship in terms of the communication.
Great. Okay. Good. Sorry, Karen, I just want to say, in terms of don't sort of feel intimidated by the quantitative research. I'm going to give you lots of tools to use, and lots of supporting material, which will hopefully help you feel a lot better about the quantitative design. It's in some ways it's got a lot more structure than qualitative design. So although the statistics can feel intimidating and sort of if you're not sort of familiar with them, it can be quite daunting. But there's a lot of structure to quantitative research, so it's not always a bad thing. Okay, so and then
Thank you.
Yeah. And then Mfundo, can you just introduce yourself so I can get to know you a little bit better?
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm very tired. I had a conference and I was in the LOC team. So it was a 4-day conference. And yeah, I'm very exhausted. My brain is not even functioning. My name is Mfundo Khatebe. I am from the Nelson Mandela University in the Media and Communications Department. My discipline is, as I said, it's media and communication. And I can say it's transdisciplinary because my research is based on disentangling disinformation in news production processes. And I also look at the use of social media, new media, AI into PR, brand communication, news journalism, and as well as I've developed an enthusiasm in conducting research in learning and teaching in digital age. And yeah, those are my key research areas. I don't have much experience when it comes to quantitative because I've been specializing with qualitative. Even if, yes, I would do your systematic literature review using a PRISM model, but it's qualitative. Then I would use a discourse analysis, and I am familiar with human participation as well, where I collect data through the use of interview using both semi-structured and structured interviews. So I don't have quite much research when it comes, I don't have much information when it comes to quantitative. I remember when I was doing BTech at Durban University of Technology, we were told to do a mixed methods. And it was, yeah, by that time, we were the beginners of research, and we were being introduced into methodology, in research methodology. So what I remember about quantitative is that it uses statistics, and the way you present your findings statistically as to compare to qualitative. There are a lot of graphs, pie charts, tables that are being used, which makes things complicated for me to understand. But I'm looking forward to gain insight, as you said, that you're going to assist Karen, since she's not familiar with quantitative as well, and I'm one of those people. When I think about either my past supervisor or my current supervisor, I don't want to talk about the past because I get anxious when I talk about the way I was supervised by my supervisor in my first master's degree. Then in my current master's degree, my second master's degree, I had a good relationship with my supervisor to a point that we are now publishing, prioritizing publishing. We've converted my master's thesis into book chapters, into conference proceedings as well. And we have started for work for next year, so which means our relationship with my supervisor, it was not just for dissertation. So the relationship is continue existing. There is that mutually beneficial relationship with my supervisor. What I've learned, one positive lesson I learned from my supervisor, be patient. And yeah, I used to be that person who wants things to be expedited, but my supervisor taught me that be patient, because if I keep on rushing the feedback, then the quality of work would be problematic. So yeah, I've learned that. And even with my student at honors level that I'm supervising, they know that yes, as much as I have a lot of work, they must be patient with me with regard to the feedback, because we've got marking. Someone spoke about the marking. I've got marking. I've got conferences to attend. At some point, I won't be timelessly when it comes to giving the feedback. It might take 2 or 3 weeks for students. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yes, thanks you, and thanks for also pointing out that sometimes you might not have a positive lesson to learn from a supervisor. I attended a supervisor workshop some years ago now, and presenter had she had a sort of characteristics of a sort of bad supervision, and I was trying to find that so the notes that I made from that session, because it was quite interesting to think about. There's positive aspects of supervisors, but then also there can be sort of not so good supervisors. Now, I have a colleague who's currently going through a difficult process with a PhD because of the relationship with the supervisor is broken down. But that's not going to happen to any of you, okay? And you're not going to be, you're all going to be excellent supervisors. Good. Okay, so I'm going to thank you for introducing yourselves. Theodora's gone out again, so I'll have to try and wait for her to get back in. And then I know there's one other person joining later as well. All right, so the module, okay, so just I know you're tired, and it's we kind of we're getting towards the end of the year as well, and this is the last module in a sequence for some of you. This module is part of a broader program of modules which relate to supervision, and I think it sounds like some of you have done the other modules as well. So our conceptualization of the module, and I say our because I'll explain to you the sort of origin of the module. It combines aspects of the design of quantitative research, but also looks at that in relation to supervision. So although we're going to concentrate on quantitative research, it's also going to be about, there's also going to be elements of supervision integrated with that. So it's going to be a bit of we're kind of combining two broad sort of themes. One is quantitative research, and then the other is the supervision of that type of research, which in many ways it's going to be similar to research which if you were supervising a qualitative project, for example, but some of the methodologies will be different, and then you would need to have expertise in statistics, for example, if you're going to be supervising quantitative research. So there are differences, and obviously the philosophy behind the research is a bit different as well. So just to explain, sorry, I should have introduced myself as well, so I forgot to do that. So I'm Dr. Richard Deavy, and I run a unit called the Statistical Consultation Service at the University of Johannesburg. My original degree, I started out as a biologist, so I studied biology as my first degree. And then when I was looking for a job, I ended up getting a job in development studies at UKZN, in the Centre for Social Development Studies, where we did lots of survey-based research. So when I first started as an academic, my work was very experimental. So I was doing sort of experiments with seeds and things like that. And then I moved into the social sciences, where I was doing a lot of survey-based work. At StatCon, StatCon is the acronym for the Statistical Consultation Service. We support staff and students with their quantitative-based projects, but we support staff from the different faculties. So we help people from health sciences, we help people from College of Business and Economics. We help staff from engineering and engineering management, for example, and also from education, from humanities, and so on. So I've got a lot of experience looking at different kinds of research designs. I'm not so familiar with Taborka, I was listening to your explanation of the kind of work that you do. I don't have a lot of experience using AI, for example. So that's something which would be interesting to maybe hear from you about what kind of research you do there. So I've been around for a long time, so I do know a lot about quantitative research. When we developed the program, there was another colleague, Prof. Marissa Rolnick, involved. She was also responsible for developing this course. And then she, eventually Prof. Vanessa Sherman, who was in the Faculty of Education at UNISA. She was also involved in the development of the course earlier on, when it was in the middle phase of when the course was running. So there's been a couple of other people involved. So although I'm facilitating the module now, there were 2 other people involved in the design of the module. So when I say our conceptualization, I'm talking about those other people who were involved as well. They've moved on to other things now, but yeah, so I'm sort of solely responsible now. All right, so the design of the program does revolve around the sort of different phases of the research journey, and I use this image to kind of capture the idea that research is a journey and there's different phases. So there's an early phase where you're conceptualizing the study. You're thinking about a theory that you might want to test if you're doing a quantitative project, and then you start designing your data collection. You start designing your data collection instrument, or you think about what data you're going to be using to do your research, and then you get to the analysis phase and the write-up phase. So each of this kind of picture, I think, depicts quite nicely the complication of the research process, and also that things can go very well, and then also things can go off track sometimes. A lot of research works very nicely. Some research, there can be problems, and then you have to work out how to deal with that. And as a supervisor, you need to be able to guide a student as to what their plan B might be if things do go wrong. And that's, I think that's an important sort of skill, to be able to work out what to do when the design doesn't go quite as you're expecting it to go, which does happen quite often. So this is the sort of graphic that I use to display that process that the student is going to be going through. Okay. So there's 3 units I've mentioned. There's the introduction and early stages of the research design. So this is going to be about conceptualizing and theorizing, deciding on a research methodology and research strategies. The middle stage would be about, in that middle stage, we're going to be looking at measurement and operationalizing measurements and establishing reliability and validity. That does come in earlier on as well, but I'm going to use the middle section to focus on themes of reliability and validity, which are important for quantitative research. And then the later stage of research design would be the sort of actual data collection process, the analysis, and interpreting and reporting findings. So when you're doing a quantitative project and writing up statistics, it's important to be able to guide the student as to reporting accurately and so on, so that you don't get into trouble with examiners and journal reviewers later on. And then there's a cross-cutting theme across the entire program about evaluating quantitative research. So you'll see I'm going to give you quite a few tools to use, which you can use to evaluate the quality of the research design. So the first activity, for example, involves evaluating a research proposal, for example. So using a sort of quantitative lens to do that. Okay. So hopefully by the end of the module, you'll be able to list the main components of quantitative research design and describe the main components of a quantitative design. Just to also note that when I talk about quantitative design, I'm not talking about pure quantitative design. I could also be meaning mixed methods as well. Mixed methods combines quantitative and qualitative. So when we talk about quantitative, it could be a component of a mixed methods design as well. Okay. Then you're also going to need to be able to demonstrate your ability to apply resources and tools to support a student towards improving their quantitative design. To differentiate between weak and strong quantitative research designs. You compile and use a set of resources and tools. So I'm going to give you some of those. You can also find your own as well. And demonstrate a commitment to improving the mentoring and evaluation support you give students, because this is about supervision. It's not just about your knowledge of quantitative design. Obviously, that will help towards supporting students, but it's also what kind of strategies can you think about which would help you guide the student in terms of their design? And just also to also again note that some of the strategies would be applicable for qualitative design as well, or critical realist kind of designs, because being a supervisor should be, there's some sort of generic skills that I think you need to have, which cut across all sorts of research methodologies. And then the final thing would be the ability to conduct a critical review of a quantitative research design performed by a student. Okay, so those are some of the objectives, which, as I said, I'm going to give you tools to help you develop your skills in these areas. So we're going to cover some knowledge, but also then some what kind of tools and strategies can we use to kind of improve our knowledge. Okay, this is a 200 credit module, which is presented by Moodle. The mode of teaching is through 6 online contact sessions, and then also you have to spend quite a lot of time self-directed learning. There's going to be 3 assessments. There's 2 assignments, and the 3rd assignment is the exam equivalent. And then I might give you some homework to do every now and then, or it's not for marks or anything, but just to suggest what you could do. And then we can also have a discussion board if you think that would be useful for the course. Okay, so we'll see how that develops. So this is the check here quickly. Sorry. Whoops. Get back here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is the timetable. So we're meeting today, Thursday, and from 5 to 7. Sorry. On Saturday, the sessions were scheduled from 9 to 4, but I'm not going to run the sessions from 9 to 4. It's too long and for an online session, and so we're going to go from 9 to 12. And I'm sure that I know from last year's class that was a preferable option. And then you'll need to do sort of self-guided learning in the rest of the time. It's quite a tight time frame for you to do the work in the time that's available for the program. So you're going to have to spend a bit of time every day working on the module in order to reach the hours needed. The deadlines for the assignments, particularly the 3rd one, is really important, because that's when there's a lot of pressure on myself and on the people running the program to get marks to the faculty. So that Saturday, the 25th of October deadline is very critical to aim for. So I want you to start working towards that early on. Okay, so just bear in mind, there is pressure from faculty to get information to them by certain deadlines, and the people running the program are very strict, so I have to be strict as well. Okay, so as a supervisor, I would say, myself as a supervisor, I would rate myself very good in terms of providing feedback, but very bad in terms of managing students' time management. So I'm not good at saying sort of pushing students to finish on time. I wasn't bad, but I had another colleague who was much better than I was. Okay, so that's the kind of overall information in terms of contact sessions. Are there any questions about this? Are there any issues that you need to raise about this? Do you want a full day on Saturday? That's another option. We could do a full day on Saturday if you want one. Okay.
I know.
No, okay. Yeah,
I'm happy
fine.
with the schedule, Doc.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah. Yeah, I just feel if we were meeting in person, then I think a whole day session would be fine. But doing an online session for a whole day is not it's not really conducive to a good session. Okay, so that's the layout of the thing. I've lost my slides. Sorry. Okay. All right. I just also want to make a note about the references. So I've got a number of what we would call classic textbooks that I use for that I've used for the course, and some of the references might look quite dated, but they're kind of constantly being updated. So we've got a book that we use for sort of guiding students with statistical analysis. It's called the SPSS Survival Guide, and I've got an old edition of that book, but it's constantly being updated on a sort of 2-3 year basis. So there is a much more current edition of that book available. It's just that I have the scanned copy from the old version that I have. So, and I'll be giving you some updated references as well as we go through the program. So don't be too concerned about the references being outdated. So because methodology doesn't really change a lot. Statistics don't. There are some developments in statistics, but a lot of the traditional tests were sort of developed in sort of 1920, and they're still exactly the same as they were then. So there's not much. Sometimes there isn't much movement in terms of some of the concepts and some of the statistics, for example. So it's just these are the resources that I used in the beginning when we started the program and when my other colleagues were involved. But there are newer editions of most of the texts available. So just bear that in mind, because they're kind of very well-established books, and they print new editions usually all the time. So that's just a note about the dates. Okay, so just to comment about assignment 1. So for this assignment, it is available. I think it should be available on the Moodle site. What this assignment is doing is it's asking you to be a reviewer or an evaluator of research. So there's a chapter that I've given you from a very good book called I can't remember the name now. Sorry, it's just the Reviewer's Guide to Quantitative Methods. It's here. It's a reviewer's guide to quantitative methods in the social sciences, but most of the statistics that and the design that they use in the book are applicable to scientists as well. So although it says statistical sciences, it's also very relevant to scientists as well. And it's a really good book if you're going to be doing quantitative research going forward in the future. It's a good idea to get hold of a copy of this book and look at I've got a copy of some of the chapters from the book to see. So, and what they do in the book is they take a particular topic. So it might be a statistical test like exploratory factor analysis, and they give you a listing of the key things that you need to be concerned about if you're doing exploratory factor analysis. They call them desiderata. So what would be desirable for that particular procedure, and then they go into detail about the list of desiderata that you as the researcher would need to be concerned about. So it's a really good book for evaluating research design. It might be about sampling, it might be about a particular statistical method. It's mainly focusing on particular statistical methods. So, for example, there's a chapter on the ANOVA procedure, there's a chapter on regression, lots of different, there's a chapter on, I think, structural equation modeling. So there's various chapters in the book which cover different topics in relation to quantitative methods. And it gives you, as I say, it gives you a listing of the important sort of criteria, you could say, that you need to consider, and goes into detail about those different criteria. So the chapter that I've given you is a very general focus of research design by Sharon Anderson Daniels. And that chapter provides a list of desiderata for reviewing research design, and we'll look at those desiderata in more detail in the next slide. And you could apply these desiderata for a research proposal, or you could apply them to a research paper. So what you're applying the desiderata to can change. But let's say, for example, you were reviewing a proposal, you could use those desiderata to review a proposal, for example. So I sit on an ethics committee at UJ, and we, as part of our work, we review research. We're reviewing the ethics of the research, but we also look at the research design as well, because if the research design is poor, it creates a problem for the ethics of the study. So you could potentially use these desiderata to analyze the proposals. And I've asked you to, so there's a number of desiderata in the chapter, but I've asked you to only focus on a few, and those are so the first desiderata is that the research design should be foreshadowed and follows logically from the general problem statement and associated research questions. So what that's saying is that you should have, if the proposal should have a general problem statement and research questions, and then the research design should follow from those, but it must be linked, they must be linked together. The research problem should be clearly articulated and researchable. The research design is appropriate to address the research problem and is clearly articulated. So is the student or the researcher using the correct research design to address the research problem? Variables are identified and operationalized. That's a common problem with student proposals, is that the proposal talks about what's going to be measured in broad terms, but the student doesn't then explain what variables are going to be used and how they're going to be actually operationalized, which means how they're going to be actually measured. And then the sampling, instrumentation, procedures, and data analysis are detailed. The research design must be internally consistent. For example, the data analysis is consistent with the sampling procedure. And then the limitations, that we skip a few criteria, and then the limitations of the design are articulated and appropriately addressed. So does the proposal acknowledge the limitations of the study, and have they addressed what the implication of that is? So what you would need to do for this activity is read through and then in the chapter, Daniels goes through goes through an explanation of each of these components to sort of explain how you would need to sort of operationalize them for evaluating a proposal. So that's part of the first assignment. And then we'll talk about it more at the next contact session. And then what you need to do for this assignment is apply these desiderata to a research proposal of a student in your discipline. And it's a good idea to choose a weaker proposal because that would then allow you to critique the proposal in more detail. If you choose a very strong proposal, you'd probably just be saying, they've done this well, they've done that well, they've done this component well, they've done that component well. And then, so what you need to do is sort of explain or describe how the student has addressed each desiderata. And if they haven't done it well, explain why you think they haven't done it well. So just as an example of this, I met with a student, a PhD, it was a master's student this morning, with their research project, and it was looking at the relationship between various. It's about online purchasing, and it's looking at what factors influence customer satisfaction. So it's looking at things like the speed of the order, the cost of the order, that kind of thing. So one of the things that the student had said in the proposal was that they wanted to do random sampling, but random sampling, we don't know what the population of online buyers is. We can't define that population. We know there's people that buy online, but we don't know who's buying online. So you can't, and to do a random sample, you need to be able to define and identify units in your population. So if you can't do that, you can't claim to be using random sampling. So that was one problem that was identified with proposal. So in that sense, the research design is not really internally consistent because they're trying to use a sampling method which doesn't work for the context that the study is taking place in. And then the other thing, so the student had identified and operationalized the variables quite well, although some of the variables that they were measuring, so they'd left out one variable completely. It wasn't in the questionnaire, so that was missing. And then for some of the variables, so for example, they were talking about measuring customer satisfaction, but the way they'd measured that, the way they were trying to operationalize that was not very good. It was problematic in terms of the questions that were being asked. So again, that would be a weakness in the study, is that the operationalization of the measurement. So customer satisfaction was well defined, but it wasn't well measured in the study. So that's the kind of thing that I would be asking you to do here for this assignment. So if you can't get hold of a proposal, you must let me know, because I need to find one for you if you don't have one. Sorry, Karen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, it was just a question. That article, there's nothing loaded on Moodle at the moment.
Okay, so just let me check. It's probably just a delay on our side, because it should be, there should be something there, yeah. So I'll check later, and then I'll let you know, yeah. Yes, Teboho?
Thanks.
Yes, Doc. I wanted to ask if is it possible also when they upload the article to upload maybe two proposals for us, then we can choose from those which one we want to use. Because I think most of us here, most of my colleagues here, I think most of their studies are on qualitative.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because it must be it should be a quantitative project, so we can yeah, okay, it's fine. So
thank you, Doc.
Yeah, so when people work in different disciplines, their studies can be quite different in terms of design. So some of them are, so the scientists tend to do more experimental based work, and then the social scientists tend to do work which involves surveys more than survey-based studies and case studies rather than experimental design. Although people in psychology, which is in the humanities faculty at UJ, do tend to do experimental designs as well. So it's not clear cut, but there's often. So what I'll try and do is I'll try and find different examples of a few different disciplines, so that you can find a discipline which might be close to yours in terms of topic, and then that will make it easier for you to. Sometimes the topic is pretty. So I mean, I think a study about online purchasing is fairly generic. Studies about often student studies where they might be looking at teaching and learning might also be quite interesting for you as academics, because I think one of you mentioned that somebody mentioned, I think it was who mentioned about I think it was Mafundu who mentioned about learning and teaching in the digital age. So that's also interesting as academics to learn more about those, and your teaching can often be part of your research topics as well. So let me look for different options, and then I'll load some of those for you so that you've got different options to look at. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's so that's the kind of plan behind assignment 1, is to use a set of criteria to kind of make an evaluation of a proposal, and you need to do this work as a supervisor, but it gives you some questions to focus on. You can also criticize the questions as well. You don't have to. I'm giving you this to use because it's from a good text, but it does. You can look at this and say you don't think these questions are very helpful, but you're going to have to use them anyway. But it's just you can also critique the the tool that you've given to use to say it's not, you don't think this is something that you would find that useful to use. So it's because not everything out there is there might be something better or something more interesting to use. Okay. All right, so I'll go back. I'll go through this again in the next session just to clarify some parts of it. So I'm going to take a quick break here, just a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to carry on with the rest of the session if that's okay. All right, so we'll just take a 4-minute break. So well, let's make it 5 minutes. So we'll meet again at 1 minute past 6. Okay, just to be pedantic. Okay, so I'm just going to just pause. I don't need to pause anything actually. So 1 minute past 6, I'll start again. Okay. Right, sorry, I'm back again. Sorry, that was took a bit. Okay, so in this next section, I'm going to talk about research philosophy, which is the sort of component which, going backwards here, which overarches the methodology that we're going to choose for the research that we do. So I'm not expecting you to answer this question. I've got some questions on the next slide that I might ask you to answer. So the question is, what is your philosophy of life? And all of us, to some extent, or to a larger degree or a smaller degree, will have a philosophy about life, and that will impact on the kind of research that you prefer to do, or that you're interested in doing. So the question I would ask is, how do you view research? It's probably not a good question to ask because it's a bit general. And then how would you describe your belief system? So those are questions that you would need to think about, which would help you decide what research philosophy is the most appropriate for your particular personality, or for you personally. So can I ask a question, maybe a slightly different question to these? Is do you have a particular or do you know what philosophy drives your interest in research? Let me put the question that way. So are you aware of the philosophy that that sort of influences your interest in a particular approach to research? Is there anybody that's willing to answer that question? No. Okay. All right. So okay, I'm going to move on then. All right. So if you look at this research onion, this gives you, it's a very nice, I think I've got the paper should be on the, it's a very short paper, which gives a nice structure for structuring research methods section of a proposal or a paper. And if you look at the onion, the outer layer is research philosophy. And then as we move down into the layers, we get to a methodological choice, we get to a strategy, and then a time horizon, and then techniques and procedures at the inner level. So the research philosophy frames the choices that we make in terms of the method that we're going to be using and the strategy that we're going to use for our research. And there's a number of research philosophies. I'm not going to go into extensive detail about them, but there's positivism, there's realism, there's interpretivism, and so on. So they're all different sort of levels. Yeah, so they're all different philosophies that you can think about for your research. Yes, Kenny. Sorry, good question.
Oh, no. I wanted to say that I cannot see the slide, and it's okay. Thank you. I can see it now.
Okay, you see it now. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit distracted by an alarm going off outside here. So yeah. So I want to focus on this outer layer just for this part of the session, and to look and see which philosophies are linked to quantitative research, because different philosophies are linked to different research approaches. So you can see under the layer of research philosophies, there's quantitative methods, there's mixed methods, there's qualitative methods, and those are influenced by the philosophy that your belief about how the world works, basically. So that's so your beliefs play an important part here. So ontology, two words we need to look at are ontology and epistemology. So ontology is what we know. So it's kind of, so if you think, just to use a practical example, It might be something like you might say, what is the satisfaction level of students at the University of Johannesburg? And that's satisfaction is a sort of concept that we can measure, and we can sort of work out what the level of that satisfaction is. So ontology is what we know about a particular issue. So it's the study of being or existence, and its basic categories and relationships. So so it seeks to determine what entities can be said to exist and how these entities are grouped according to similarities and differences. So that's the idea behind ontology, is measuring things and objects and relationships and so on. And then epistemology is how we know what we know. So epistemology is more linked to methodology. So what methodologies can we use to know what we know? So the ontology is the knowledge itself, and then epistemology is the study of knowledge. So it's how do we know what we know about. So those are the two key terms, which then have different philosophies underpinning them. I've also included this. There's a very good book by Hart. Hart writes books on research methods, including literature reviews. He's got a good book on, I think it's on doing a qualification, but then he's also got a very well-known book on doing a literature review. And the reason why I've included this slide is because there's two sources of literature that you need to use to do research. One is the topic literature, where you get information about the topic, and in a sense that's the ontology part of the study. And then there's the methodology literature, in which you look at the methodologies that have been used to examine the problem. And that's more about the epistemology. So what kinds of methodologies have been used to study the problem? And then each of those, by reviewing those, or by examining the different forms of literature, you'll be able to identify knowledge gaps, definitional problems, theoretical problems, and that's if you're looking at the topic literature. And then if you're looking at the methodological literature, you'll identify methodological problems, empirical gaps, and potentially political issues. So that's I think it's just to kind of make a point, because it does link into the ontology and epistemology themes, because the topic literature would be about the ontology, and then the methodological literature would be about the epistemology. How do we know about that particular topic? And then different disciplines will have different sort of methodological processes that they use, and different philosophies. So these tables just show the difference between quantitative and qualitative, and I don't specifically, I'm not intending to separate the two out here, or to say that they're completely separate. That's not the point. And there is an author, I can't remember his name now, but he writes about quantitative and qualitative work in a different way, to sort of just treating them as two separate types of design. And it's not my intention here to treat them as separate designs either, just to say that they do have differences. So the ontological assumption of quantitative research is that reality is objective and singular apart from the researcher. The ontological assumption of qualitative research is that realities are subjective and multiple, as seen by participants in a study. So the key difference there is the quantitative design would be, or the quantitative research would see reality as being something objective that you can measure. So if we see something in front of us, if we observe something, it's quite well defined, and we can measure what's in front of us. Whereas the qualitative would say that the reality that we see is subjective, and it varies from person to person. And that's the key difference between the two methodologies in terms of the ontological assumption. The epistemological assumption, what is the relationship of the researcher to what is being researched? In a quantitative framework, the researcher would be considered independent from that being researched, whereas in a qualitative design, the researcher interacts with what is being researched. So it's much more personal and more engaging in a qualitative context. So axiological assumption, what is the role of values? Quantitative research would be value-free and unbiased, or would be considered value-free and unbiased, whereas qualitative research would be value-laden and biased because of the more personal relationship of the researcher with the subjects being, or the persons being researched. So these are just, I'm not going to go through all of these, but so, yeah, we can quickly. So in terms of the language used, quantitative research would be, we use a formal language based on a set of definitions. We use the impersonal voice. So in quantitative research, you don't say I. We shouldn't. We don't often say I. In scientific research, in science writing, we don't say I did this and I did that and I thought this and I thought that. And then we also use quantitative words, statistical words. In qualitative research, it can be more informal. You're much more likely to use the personal voice. So you might say, I found this or I discovered that. And then there's certain qualitative words that we use when we're writing in qualitative, when we're using language in that qualitative context. And then methodological assumption, the quantitative research is deductive in design. So we're looking at causes, effects. We normally have a hypothesis that we want to test. We can make generalizations which lead to predictions, obviously if the research design allows for that. And then we can claim that the sort of findings are accurate and reliable through validity and reliability. For qualitative research, it's a more inductive process. There's emerging design. Categories are identified during the research process rather than before the research process. And patterns and theories are developed for understanding. We're not testing a theory, we're developing a theory. So that's and then in qualitative research, we talk about trustworthiness and credibility rather than validity and reliability. So there's different language we use for the sort of validation of the information that we get. So there's key sort of differences between the approaches, and your personal kind of view of the world would sort of maybe push you towards preferring one or the other particular design. So it's not, so I mean, it's something that you, but there's no reason why you can't consider both and use both. Even if you might be much more partial towards qualitative design, there's no reason why you couldn't use quantitative design as well. It might not sit well with you in terms of your belief of how the world works, but you could still do it. So these, I'm not going to go into detail about these. You can have a look at these slides. But basically it's saying that you'll be more comfortable with a quantitative paradigm if you align with the ontological and epistemological and various other assumptions of a quantitative paradigm. And if you're not comfortable with those, you might fit better with a qualitative design. And there definitely are, I think there definitely is a relationship between your belief of how the world works and which particular research approach you would like to take. It's also influenced by discipline though. So even if you might find that even though you have a preference for the quantitative assumptions, for example, your discipline is mainly qualitative, so you would then end up doing a lot of qualitative work because the discipline expects it rather than because that's where your preference lies. Okay, so these are these are reasons for selecting a paradigm. So if you think about the nature of the problem, quantitative paradigms have usually previously been studied by other researchers, so that there's a body of literature that exists, that we have known variables that we want to measure, and there's existing theories that we can test. And those that literature and those known variables and so on would have been derived from a qualitative study usually. So we normally, the pattern would be, if you're exploring a particular issue, you would start with a qualitative design, and then once you get to know the topic very well, then you would then sort of start to maybe use quantitative designs. It's quite difficult to, you can investigate an issue using a quantitative design, but usually if you, in a sort of academic way, we normally look at something in a qualitative way first, and then that allows us to develop new variables and theory. Yeah, and then the qualitative paradigm is more likely to be used when we don't know a lot about a particular situation or a context, and there may not be a theory base for the study because the theory is going to develop from the research. Yeah, and then obviously the audience for the study would be, in a quantitative paradigm, it would be individuals accustomed to or supportive of quantitative studies, and in the qualitative paradigm, it would be individuals accustomed to or being supportive of qualitative studies. And there is definitely a sort of a leaning of certain groups of people towards, or organizations towards, more statistical or versus more qualitative kinds of studies. So economists, for example, are not very open to qualitative work. They need to see numbers, they need to see statistics. Usually, there's not a lot of openness towards more qualitative kind of information for economists, for example. So the different disciplines would have different, whereas if you're working in a more social science discipline, there's much more openness towards, so if you're working in politics or social work, for example, there's much more openness towards qualitative design and qualitative findings. Okay, I'm not going to go through this table, but it's from a very good book by Huff called Designing Research for Publication. And again, if you're going to be doing research a lot, and if you're going to carry on doing research as part of your career, this is a very nice book. It's got lots of good suggestions for activities which you could use for students as well. For example, I'm going to use an example not in this session but in a later session for how to help students get going on a topic, for example, from this book. So it's called Designing Research for Publication, and I'm going to use a chapter from it for the theoretical component of this module. I think the key thing about this slide is that you've got different worldviews. So you've got rationalist, formalist, empiricist, logical positivist, pragmatist, and then you've got the ontology and the epistemology for each of those. And then you've got the focus of scholarly activity. So the key thing about this table is that some of the approaches are quantitative and some of them are qualitative, so more qualitative in design or in conceptualization. So an empiricist approach, which is the Locke-Human-Mill, where the ontology is the knowledge of the physical world can be nothing more than a generalization from particular instances and can never reach more than a high degree of probability. That's a very sort of statistical kind of statement, because when we use statistics, we talk about probability, and we'll say that something can never be disproved, for example, and so on. So that's a very quantitative kind of approach, the empiricist approach. Logical positivist is also a more kind of quantitative philosophy. The world is orderly and can be reduced to elementary concepts and rules. Its nature can be described without emotive concepts. So that's a very sort of theories reduced to the truths of logic and mathematics coupled with propositions referring to sense experience under the focus of scholarly activity. So that's very mathematical, very quantitative in design. Pragmatist is that's often used for mixed methods. So pragmatism is a approach which is often linked to mixed methods, which is a combination of quantitative and qualitative. Social constructivists would also be considered more qualitative in design. So insight. So here you've got individuals and groups participate in the creation of their perceived reality. That's very much a qualitative kind of philosophy. If we look at the focus of scholarly activity, one of the focuses is insight created from multiple accounts, which is again very much a sort of qualitative philosophy. Then we've got, I'm going to skip through these. Another quantitative would be scientific realist, which is unobservable things talked about by science, a little different from ordinary observable things such as tables and chairs, and they exist independently of the minds or acts of scientists. So that's saying that there's objects out there which are independent of us, and we can measure them, and we can have scientific success in terms of measuring things. The qualitative is postmodernism. The world is transient, ephemeral, and emergent. So that's suggesting that there aren't these, everything is changing all the time. It's very, things move and change and shift. And you play with varied perspectives. Okay. So personally, as my own view is, I don't sit comfortably with postmodernism. I can understand what it means, but for me personally, because I had a training in science, and because my undergrad and part of my postgrad degree was in the science discipline, and because I then moved into social sciences where we did surveys which were quantitative and measuring various things. I'm much more of a sort of scientific realist maybe, or a moving back here, a sort of logical positivist or something like that. So that's where I sit in the thing. But I can see the sort of debate about postmodernism and how it might be relevant in certain contexts. And I think that's probably an important thing to think about, is that the context is probably important. So there might be certain instances where it makes perfect sense to be a scientific realist, for example, or to think like a scientific realist and behave like one. And then there might be other contexts where it might be relevant to behave and think and behave like a postmodernist, for example, depending on the context. So that's So the critical realism is also, I think, often associated with mixed methods as well. Okay, so have a look at that table. I've got some other ones as well. So the problem with philosophy and helping a student with it is that it can be quite messy when you read about the different philosophies and so on. So if you look at Huff, for example, Huff refers to rationalist, formalist, empiricist, logical positivist, and so on. And then, so those are categories used by Huff. Reeves and Hedberg, they have a very good paper, or chapter actually, on 4 approaches to doing research. So they talk about the analytical, empirical, positivist, quantitative design. This is for evaluation research. The chapters on evaluation research. Then they have the constructivist, hermeneutic, interpretivist, and qualitative design. Then they have the critical theory, neo-Marxist, postmodern praxis design. And then they have the eclectic mixed methods, pragmatic design. So there you've got 4 key sort of approaches there: quantitative, qualitative, critical theory, and then mixed methods. So you've got 4 different designs that you can use there. 2 of them are quantitative. One of them is qualitative. So 2 of them, one of them is purely quantitative, one of them is partly quantitative, one of them is purely qualitative, and then critical theory could have some. That's more of a philosophical approach with a debate rather than necessarily using empirical data, but you could have under that particular approach have some empirical data, which might be quantitative and qualitative as well. Crotty, who's got a book about research philosophy under epistemology, he talks about objectivism, constructivism, and subjectivism. So objectivism would be quantitative, subjectivism would be qualitative, and then constructivism would be something in between those, more mixed maybe. And then the theoretical perspectives are positivism, interpretivism, phenomenology, and critical inquiry. So sometimes the kind of categorization is not always consistent. So it's just a question of if the student is working in this area or working with the philosophy, they just need to find a good reference for the area that they're working in, and then use that just as long as they're consistent in how they're using the terminology. But it does differ sometimes from author to author. Okay, and then positivism is one of the paradigms. So in terms of quantitative research, positivism is one of the paradigms that we can use. Although I think nowadays we're more likely to use post-positivism than positivism. I'm not going to go into detail about these, just to say that there are these different options that the student could look for in terms of the point being that there are these different paradigms. And the students can use these to frame their research in that philosophical dimension. So, for example, positivism would say that reality is context-free. Researchers come in as objective observers. There are laws governing social phenomena which we can measure. So those are some of the things about of positivism. There's also post-positivism, which emerged historically it emerged as a result of criticism of positivism. So yeah, the ontological position is critical realism, which is quite a nice philosophy. And then yeah, it's saying that reality exists independent of the observer. But this brings in the idea that which wasn't in positivism, that the researcher's beliefs and values can affect what is being observed, which is important. And that's starting to lean towards the more qualitative approaches as well. So the research is not completely separate from completely independent from the study, and that's quite clear when you look at how science works, for example, and how academia works. There's often influences that come in. So that's the post-positivism. And then the qualitative design would be an example for a paradigm would be interpretivism. And that's it's a very different alternative to positivism. And then that would sort of an interpretivist would argue that there's no single reality that exists. There's multiple realities, and we construct realities. So that's a very different approach to saying that there is a reality out there which is independent from us. So what you believe about this philosophy is which would help you kind of find yourself in a particular area. And then mixed methods, because quantitative and qualitative research have strengths and weaknesses, which so quantitative research has strengths which are qualitative research's weaknesses, and qualitative research has strengths which are quantitative research's weaknesses. And the mixed methods is an attempt to kind of bring those differences together and to use the complementary strengths and to eliminate the weaknesses of the two approaches. it's a nice approach to use if you've got the time and the resources to do it. You don't have to. Sometimes you can do a purely quantitative or qualitative project without needing to do a mixed methods. But mixed methods can be very effective depending on the topic that you are investigating. So pragmatism is the paradigm that's in which mixed methods is located, and it's so that chapter by Reeves and Hedberg, where they group the main research paradigms, and they have 4 main paradigms for doing evaluation-based research. So pragmatism would be the mixed methods as part of the mixed methods design there. It's also it's called pragmatism partly because it's used to solve practical problems. So often the research, if you're doing a mixed methods research project, all research has some problem-based reasoning behind it, but often with mixed methods research, there might be a practical problem that you're trying to solve, not just a philosophical or a sort of research-based problem. Okay, and I'm not going to go through this slide again. It's just another slide from Frowles and Ongubuzi, where you've got the contemporary research paradigms, post-positivism, pragmatism of the middle, critical theory, constructivism, and participatory research. And they've listed the ontology, epistemology, methodology, rhetoric, and so on of each approach. Again, this might be quite a useful table to give to students. So if they're working in in a quantitative area, then they would probably choose post-positivism as their research paradigm. If they're doing a mixed methods, they would use pragmatism in the middle. If they're doing qualitative research, they would use constructivism, and participatory is a particular kind of a very sort of specific kind of research design where you're actually participating in the context that you're doing your research in. And not a lot of students would be able to use that kind of approach. And then critical theory, I'm not focusing on that particularly because it's a much more philosophical, discourse-related approach to doing research, and you could have a quantitative design within it, but it's not. I think it's more of a desktop kind of philosophical approach. Okay, and then again, just a nice graphic here. And I'm not. I would sort of contest this to say qualitative is the best, quantitative is the best. I wouldn't ever make a statement like that because I think all kinds of research have a value, and as much as qualitative research might have some strengths, quantitative research also has strengths. So it's not like one of them is better than the other. But again, this gives you the words or the language that we use for each one. So qualitative methods would be constructivism, inductive logic, exploratory research. Quantitative methods are more likely to be post-positivism, deductive logic, and confirmatory research. Yeah. So, and then mixed methods is a combination of the two, and it's more pragmatic. Yeah, so with this slide, we've got 4 levels of discourse, sorry. So when the student is writing about research, they need to kind of cover the philosophy of science, the general problem-solving methodologies, and the operational strategies, and then the procedural sequences that they're going to use for the research. So at this stage, I'm focusing on the paradigm level, which is the philosophy of science. So there's those different philosophies. That's the kind of root that's the roots that are going to then determine what the rest of the tree looks like. At the next level, which is the general problem-solving methodologies, that's the second layer of the onion, or the next the trunk of the tree, that would be mixed methods, qualitative, quantitative design. Then we've got what I would call strategies, operational strategies, the different kinds of strategies that we can use to do research, and we'll talk about those more in later session. And then you've got your procedures, which are your sampling and your instruments and your data collection analysis. So that those are the four kind of components that it's another way of getting the student to look at different components of the design. Okay, so and then the philosophy kind of will determine the kinds of strategies and methods and things that we're going to use for the research. So the question would be is how much philosophy should the student include in their proposal or thesis? So I'm going to ask you that question and I need you to answer this. So how much research philosophy should the student include in their proposal or thesis? Any suggestions?
Sorry, Doc. May you
Yes,
please rephrase the question?
So how much research philosophy? So if a student is doing, you can even talk about your own experience. So if you're writing a proposal, if you're writing a thesis, how much of that, how much research philosophy, how much detail must you go into about the research philosophy for your proposal or for your thesis if you're a student?
Okay. In my case or in my field, when we do the proposal, we actually, in terms of the methodology, we don't go into too detail when we are at the proposal level, but we'll just give an overview of the methodology, kind of an overview, so that you know what methodologies governs whatever research you'll be working on.
Yeah.
So
okay.
maybe we will basically touch on the philosophy that applies for that type of study,
Yeah.
the research approach. Maybe we'll also touch on the research design, if it's a quantitative, because we always do quantitative research. And then we try to link it, we follow the onion, but we're just touching the basics. We're not really going into detail to explain each one of these layers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Mafundo, sorry.
Thank you, Doc. In media and communication, when it comes to research proposal, what do students include? I will speak on honors and masters because I haven't been I haven't seen the proposal or read proposal for PhD student. So in terms of proposal, we expect students to include what how data will be collected, because after we have seen their research topics, their aims and objectives, and the research questions. So now the interest is with regard how the information will be collected, and will you be using qualitative or quantitative, or will you be using both? You'll be using mixed methods, and you need to, when it comes to qualitative, because our students, they are always qualitative, then we want to know whether in terms of your research design, will you be collecting data through, in terms of data collection, sorry, you'll be using interviews, will you be using the discourse analysis, will you be using a visual ethnography, because in digital age, in qualitative, for example, what we do, we go and see how people are engaging on a public platform. So basically, we want to see whether in research methodology, the method that you're going to use is going to allow you to have a direct interaction with your informants or your participants, or is your data that you're going to collect, it will be a secondary data? So that's the interest, and we anticipate the student to substantiate and to elaborate so that there are no questions with regard ethics consideration. Thank you.
Okay, good, thanks. Yeah, so it's mainly, so what you're saying is it's mainly about the lower levels of methodology, not so much about the philosophy, which I think, so when I did my PhD, we had a lecturer sort of talking to us about design when we started out the process. And he said, when we asked him how much philosophy, when it came to the question of how much research philosophy should you write about in your thesis, he said none. but I think it depends on the discipline. So some disciplines will focus a bit more on it than others. But I think the key thing is the student must just be aware of where so they need to be aware that philosophy underpins their choice of methodology. So if they're doing a quantitative project, it's suggesting that they have this worldview about how the world works, in a particular view about how the world works, which is different from if you're doing a qualitative project, for example. So I think it's important for them to understand that, but you don't necessarily have to have pages and pages in your thesis about it. If your thesis is about the philosophy of research, then obviously you would have to write about it. But because you're trying to cover lots of other content, including the topic and the problem and all the rest of it, you can't go into a lot of detail about the philosophy. And I think that's, and scientists, for example, social scientists will spend more time talking about the philosophy than the scientists, for example, just because of the discipline. So there's differences within disciplines as to how they deal with that. Yeah, so it's but I think the key thing is the students just need to be aware of that there is a philosophy which is driving their choice of methodologies. Okay. All right, and then just to end, I'm going to do a quick activity. It's a fun thing. So when you work with students, this is you have to have a relationship with them, and we all have different personalities. So this is I've taken this from a book called Surrounded by Idiots, which is written by I think he's a Norwegian chap, and he's got this idea that there's 4 main types of personality, and it's just a fun thing. So I want you to look at the next table, and I'm going to just read out the characteristics, and then you can decide whether you are green, blue, red, or yellow. And then I'll explain why it's relevant for the students once we've done that. Okay, so I just want you to read the columns of attributes, and then you must decide which column best reflects you. It might be that you have attributes of different colors, but choose the one that you mainly identify with. Okay, so you might identify with more than one, but you should have one main color that you identify with. So red, the description there is aggressive, ambitious, strong-willed, goal-orientated, pushing, problem solver, pioneer, decisive, innovator, impatient, controlling. Impatient, I'm thinking about you, Mfundo, you said you're impatient. Controlling, convincing, performance-orientated, powerful, results-orientated, initiator, speed, timekeeper, intense, opinionated, straightforward, independent. Yellow is talkative, enthusiastic, persuasive, creative, optimistic, social, spontaneous, expressive, charming, full of vitality, self-centered, sensitive, adaptable, inspiring, needs attention, encouraging, communicative, flexible, open, sociable, imaginative, and easygoing. Green is patient, relaxed, self-controlled, reliable, composed, loyal, modest, understanding, lengthy, stable, prudent, discreet, supportive, good listener, helpful, producer, persistent, reluctant, thoughtful, conceals feelings, considerate, and kind. And then blue is conscientious, systematic, distant, correct, conventional, seems insecure, objective, structured, analytical, perfectionist, needs time, reflecting, methodological, seeks facts, quality orientated, scrutinizes, follows rules, logical, questioning, meticulous, reflecting, and reserved. So those are the different kind of characteristics that Erikson identifies as people with a red personality, a yellow personality, a green personality, or a blue personality. So which color would you identify with? There's no right or wrong answer here. Which color do you think best matches your personality? And they all have good points and bad points. Well, not, yeah, mainly good points though. Yes, Karen, yeah.
I think I would be somewhere between a yellow and a green, but potentially more of a green.
Okay, right. Thank you. Others? Yes, Tebogo?
Yes, I'm with Karen as well, Doc. I'm also, but for me, I think green, not red, green.
Okay.
I'm at
yeah.
green. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Mfundo, have you had a look?
I have few red. I'm not gonna lie, because yeah, impatient is one, especially when when the supervisor is quiet. I used to be very impatient, and yeah, ambitious. Yeah,
Okay.
part of, yes, I'll be very ambitious in everything that I write. Then I remember my supervisor said to me, I said I want to graduate, and by that time I hadn't submitted my chapter 5, my chapter 6, yeah. So my supervisor like, stop being ambitious. And I can say in yellow as well, optimistic and enthusiasm and communicative.
Okay.
Then green, yeah, there's quite a lot.
You can't choose all of them. You can only choose one. Okay. So
yeah, but
okay.
I'm just saying, like, when I look at this, it's it's quite tricky for me to choose one.
Sure. Yeah.
But I go with yellow.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's fine. Good. Okay. Theodora, can you communicate now? Theodora's having problems with her sound, I think. Kenny, do you have a color?
I do. I think I'm more in the green, but I do have some in the blue. Yeah.
Okay, right, that's fine. Okay, good. Okay, so the reason why I'm showing you this is just to so the idea about this this kind of book that Thomas has written, Erikson has written, is that he kind of makes the point that we have different personalities, and when we start interacting with people with different personalities, there can be we can get on with other people, and then we sometimes clash with other people. So he's got these 4 groups, and then he defines the groups according to the task orientation and issue orientation, and the relation orientation between the groups. So, and then some groups are more introverted, passive, and reserved, and others are more extrovert, active, and implementers. So, according to him, the blue and red are more task orientated and issue orientated people, and then the green and the yellow are more relational orientated. So they're more sort of focused on relationships, And then the green and the blue are more introverted, passive, and reserved, and the red and the yellow are more extrovert, active, and implementers. So it's not to say that this is perfect or it's not a scientific kind of thing, but it's just to make the point that we do have different personalities. And what happens if you're a green person, and if you've got a green personality, and then your student is a red personality, for example. Yes, sort of, Mfundo, you've got your hand up.
No, it's a mistake, Doc. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. All right. So then, so these are some negative and positive attributes of each personality. So no personality is considered perfect. And then, so each of the personalities, so the blue is defined as being analytical. That's the main sort of characteristic of the blue person. The green person is stable. The red person is dominant, so they have lots of dominant characteristics. And then the yellow would be considered inspiring in terms of their counter personality. So it's somebody who's, I had a sort of boss who I would classify as being a yellow personality who was very, came up with lots of ideas, but she wasn't always very stable, shall we say. No, I don't mean stable in psychological way. I just mean she was often jumping on from one idea to another quite often, and not, she wouldn't focus on a particular issue for very long, for example. So that would be an example of a yellow personality. Yeah. So then this is where the issue comes in. So green and red would be challenging combinations. So the green person and the red person wouldn't necessarily get on very well because the red person is task-orientated, issue-orientated, extrovert, and active and implementer, whereas the green person is more relation-orientated and introverted, passive, and reserved. And then also the blue and the yellow might clash because the blue is task-orientated and issue-orientated and introvert, whereas the yellow person is more relation-orientated and extrovert, active, implementer. So it's just to think again about if you're a green supervisor and you've got a red student, there's going to be a clash there, and that's sometimes maybe why that's sometimes why students and supervisors don't always get on, and they have difficult relationships because they've got different interests. So the blue person is very diligent. They like to have things done just so. They're very sort of rules driven, and if they come into contact with a yellow person who's not rule driven at all, there's going to be a clash of personalities between those two. And the same thing with the red and the green. The green person is more passive and more sort of a quieter person. The red person is very flamboyant and pushy and so on. So that's, I don't mean that in a rude way, but they're more aggressive, shall we say. And then the green person is not so aggressive. So that would be a very different kind of personality. And then Erickson sort of makes a joke, sort of talking about idiots, which are the people who are not like you in terms of their personality. And there's ways that you can adapt to the behavior of the other person. So if you're dealing with a red person, you need to speed up your, Mfuno, if you were a red student and your supervisor was a green supervisor, you want him to speed up, but he's not speeding up. So he needed to speed up for you. But he managed to convince you to slow down. Yeah. And then you mustn't make small talk, and you must stick to the topic if you're dealing with a red person. So don't sort of beat around the bush with a red person. So the yellow person, according to the definition, would be somebody who's very much they're sort of very what's the word for it? I want to use the word flighty, but that's not a good word to use. They're very sort of they sort of jump from one idea to another. So they're very creative. They're a creative person, and they'll sort of move from one idea to another quite quickly. They won't stay on a particular issue for very long because they like new ideas and things. So with them, you mustn't sort of focus on the nitty gritty, the detail of things, because they'll get bored. and you must, they like to do things on gut feeling. So if you're working with them, you need to pretend that you've come to a decision based on gut feeling. Yeah, and then the green person, you need to give them space because they like to be quiet and sort of inactive for a while. And then you need to, they won't organize things for you. If you're working with a green person, you need to do the planning. So if you're a green supervisor, your students would need to do the planning themselves. And what I was saying earlier, I mentioned for myself, I was very good at giving feedback to students, but I wasn't very good at keeping them on track with their timelines and things. And I would sort of classify myself as a mix of green and blue in this particular personality register kind of thing. And when I look at that option of handling the planning, that's definitely very true of me. I'm not going to plan somebody else's time for them. So yeah, and then a blue person, if you're dealing with a blue person, you can't come to a meeting if you haven't done your work kind of thing. They're going to be very cross with you if you don't know your facts. And if you don't know what you're doing, they're going to be annoyed. So I think the idea behind this is when I did my PhD, we had to do some extra activities and things. And one of the things I did was there was a psychologist who was looking at this personality matrices and sort of asking the question about how we get on with other people. So I had to go and fill out a form which kind of identified what certain characteristics were. It wasn't this blue, yellow, green thing. This is a simpler version of what the psychologist was doing. But the idea behind the study was to try and look at relationships between supervisors and students, for example, to see how different personalities either clash or get on well. And I think, so I think it's part of your, and it does link back to this idea of worldviews as well, because if you're working with a student who has a very different worldview to you, it's going to be more difficult to have a good relationship with them and to work well with them. So this is just linking into that sort of the relationship that you're going to form with your students. And then if you're struggling with a student, how do you then adapt to how do you change your thinking about working with them in order to work with them? So if you've got a student saying you're taking too long to give me feedback, how do you respond to that criticism? Do you speed up, or do you convince the student that they need to slow down, kind of thing? So that's I think it's a fun thing, but it's also interesting to think about our relationships with other people and how we can manage them such that the relationship continues to be a good relationship rather than breaking down. Yeah, so I'm stopping here. I think that's all I wanted to talk about, and we're at the end of time anyway. So are there any questions? We're supposed to have a few more minutes of questions, but we can ask them quickly. Are there any questions?
Good afternoon.
Yes, hello. Hi, Theodora. Sorry, I think you're having problems on your side.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but you're breaking up a lot.
Good afternoon. Today.
Theodora, we can't. You're very unclear. Your sound is it's not clear.
Am I audible?
You're audible, but we can't hear you because the sound is breaking up.
I heard out. Yeah, I couldn't unmute. I'm trying to move around. I am in Northern Cape.
That's better.
I am not in Gauteng. I'm actually.
I can hear you now.
Having a network problem. Yeah, we had a network problem. Unfortunately,
yes.
Unfortunately, I couldn't engage in the in the activities.
No,
The
it's
first
fine.
activity was introduction of myself. Otherwise, I will do it with the next session.
Yes, that's
But
fine. We can do that. Yeah.
I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened, and I'm glad that I could get an opportunity to cite my problems. Otherwise, I was through the whole session. I had everything that was put on the table.
No, I could see you
My
having
question
trouble.
is,
I could see you having trouble with your getting online and stuff. Yeah.
it's not about the activities, the classes, the contacts. Even where we are, from time to time, we lose a network and connection.
Okay, it sounds like it's going again. You were fine, but now it's breaking
With
up again.
Our televisions. I think is the area where we are. We are between the mountains. I am in Uppington, in the northern. With the same time you were cut some of the, but I would be back with the next session. Maybe I will engage more. These slides online besides the recordings.
Right. Okay. Well, it's nice. It's nice to finally meet you, and
That's my question.
We'll see. Yeah. Can you ask your question quickly?
I said that the slides. Can we get? Can I get the slides?
Yes. Yeah. You will get
How
the slides.
How do I access the slides?
They'll be put online.
Okay.
They'll be put online for you. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Theodora, you can introduce yourself next week. Okay. So on Saturday. Yeah. Okay. So I'll see you all on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.